We're back again for Your Ears Only. I'm David Alpern.
I'm Melissa Axelbarth with a quote from the news. There exists probable cause. That was North Carolina police investigator Christopher Serino on grounds for manslaughter charges against George Zimmerman after initial investigation into his fatal shooting of unarmed teenager Trayvon Martin, though Zimmerman was not arrested for weeks until a special prosecutor alleged second-degree murder. But newly released documents were not definitive on how their bloody confrontation actually began. Now this.
Und in diesem Sinne ist durch die Einführung des Euro,
through the introduction of the euro and through the crisis we've experienced, we now have more sincere discussions. We have to find harder solutions. Just because we belong to different parties doesn't mean we cannot work together.
For a little while anyway, happy cheers brought forth by passing of the Olympic flame to Britain's Princess Anne in Athens last week drowned out the sound of ATM machines that have been churning out what now totals nearly $1 billion in euros by Greeks fearing that their savings will soon be devalued when the country is forced to quit the Eurozone. Political stalemate among major and minor parties of the left and right prompted scheduling of yet another election as German Chancellor Angela Merkel talked in only the vaguest terms of compromise with a new leading opponent of her austerity demands, just elected French President François Hollande.
Can Europe afford to let Greece go? Will it lead to further dismantling of the European financial union? What would that mean for America's economy and the world? And what can be done to prevent the crisis, or at least manage it? To consider those questions for Your Ears Only, we're joined again by French economist Nicolas Veron, senior fellow at the Brussels-based Bruegel think tank and visiting fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics in Washington. Welcome back to our broadcast.
Thank you.
Some experts say that your Eurozone neighbors are already assuming a massive Greek default and departure from the Eurozone without all that much wider damage. Others see a spreading economic paralysis. But you've expressed doubts that Chancellor Merkel and other leaders can really afford to let that happen.
Well, indeed, there's a lot of brinkmanship, and I would even say there's a lot of bluffing, both from the part of Greek party leaders and also, I suspect, on the part of some European leaders that are on the other side of the negotiating table. The problem being that there is not really a negotiating table right now because there's no real government in Greece. There's a caretaker government, but the crisis is precisely that no coalition has been formed. So we have to wait to a certain extent until the next round of elections in Greece in June and hoping that there will be a government formed and then a true negotiation that cannot really happen now. But I do believe, I am certainly among those who believe that a Greek exit would be necessarily disruptive, very disorderly, and something that European leaders really want to avoid and are ready to go quite far to avoid.
Well, you've been encouraged by some remarks by Chancellor Merkel. What do you see her and other European leaders actually doing short-term in the face of continued Greek refusal to go along with at least as much austerity as has been required for the additional bailout support they've been getting?
My impression is that the central banks of the euro system will support the Greek banking system until a negotiation can take place, and therefore nothing disorderly should happen between now and the negotiation in the second half of June.
Well, on balance, so far, international financial instability has actually helped the U.S. economy, pouring waves of foreign wealth into Treasury notes. They're so much safer that Washington has to pay remarkably low interest on the new debt. What impact do you see in the U.S. if Greece actually has to quit the euro?
Well, first, Treasury notes are indeed with low interest rates. That doesn't mean they're safe, and we've seen that before because precisely part of the Greek crisis is that Greece was able to borrow at very low rates when it joined the Eurozone, and now it seems like it was a misjudgment by the marketplace. So I just don't want to say the U.S. is like Greece. It's not. It's much more solid. That said, I think what the U.S. has to fear is not a problem in Greece, which is a relatively small economy, but the consequences of what would be a disorderly situation in Europe as a whole, and to take a bit of a dramatic language, a European meltdown, and this would be very negative for the U.S. economy because all the trade and financial links between the U.S. and Europe.
In the long term, you stress the importance of a European banking union. What would that entail beyond what exists now? How would it help?
Well, basically the question is whether the European Union can have a monetary union, at least for those countries that adhere to the Eurozone, without having an integrated space for banking and an integrated banking policy. And in the US, the answer eventually has been no, we need a national banking system. This has been built in several steps during the Civil War, at the creation of the Fed, later when barriers to cross-border state banking were dismantled. So it has taken a long time in the US, but eventually the US history shows that it's very difficult to have a monetary union on a continental scale without having an integrated banking system. And I think we're facing exactly the same problem in Europe right now. We do have relatively consistent banking regulation in the different member states of Europe, but the supervision and the crisis resolution framework is strictly national. That's not sustainable, and probably this crisis is going to accelerate in Europe an evolution that has taken in a different period, of course, and under different financial and economic conditions, has taken a long time in the U.S.
You also say that broader stability would be enhanced by moving something called the Financial Stability Board of Major Economic Powers to Asia.
Oh, that's a completely different issue. So we're leaving Europe and we're looking at the global scale. The Financial Stability Board is something that used to be called the Financial Stability Forum, had been created after the Asian crisis of the late 90s, has been expanded and renamed and empowered to do more by the G20 group of the 20 largest economies following the Lehman crisis and the financial crisis of 2007-2008. So it's a bit of a work in progress, but basically this is a sort of watchtower at the global level of the global financial system and of what global financial regulators and also to an extent national financial regulators are doing to keep the financial system stable. The reason why I think it would be sensible to move the secretariat of this organization, it's a very tiny secretariat, about 20, 25 people who are currently based in Basel in Switzerland. The reason I think it would make sense to move them to Asia is that currently Asia is a growing part of the financial system. Depending how you measure it, it's between 20 and 30% maybe of the global financial system now and growing almost by the day, but they have not very much of an ownership, a sense of ownership, a sense of buy-in into the global financial authorities that are around. So I think we have to recognize that Asians are increasingly central to the global financial system.
French economist Nicolas Veron is a senior fellow at the Brussels-based Bruegel think tank and a visiting fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics in Washington.
Quote from the news, a polite knock on the door to tell us to get ready. That was Center for American Progress senior fellow Roy Texera on the report that less than half of all babies born in the United States now are white and that minorities will be the majority much sooner than expected.
Next, on a lighter note, Marx sings, no relation to Carl, for your ears only.